In my previous video, I discussed why one of the most important characteristics of a father is disciplining their children.
All that's fake, man. All that's fake, but this ass whooping ain't gonna be fake. Get that on Facebook. Tell them about that. Tell them that. Tell them about that. Show them that. Show them that. Facebook that. The gang goes on.
In this video, I'm going to describe the importance of fatherly compassion, which is well noted in Psalm chapter 103, verse 13. As a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. Now, how does the Bible illustrate compassion in the first place? Another psalm states that the Lord is a compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. In order to better understand this, we must look at how God was compassionate towards people. Before we do that, however, it is important to understand what it means to have compassion as far as secular knowledge is concerned. Merriam-Webster defines compassion as sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. So if we piece this together with the use of the word in the Bible, we can say that the Bible illustrates fatherly and godly compassion as a father who has a sympathetic consciousness of his children's distress, as well as a desire to alleviate that distress. In Matthew chapter 14, verse 14, we see this. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. In the parable of the Prodigal Son, we see that even though the main character demands a share of the father's estate, which is promised in the father's will, once he receives what he demands, he ends up squandering everything on irresponsibilities in a distant country. It then places him in a poor position to the point of starvation and desperation. Coming to his senses, he returns home expecting to be made a servant of his father instead of having any right as a son. However, what happened once he returned home was the complete opposite. His father, quote, saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him, as well dressing him in the finest clothing he had and killing the fattest calf he had in celebration of his return. What was displayed in this story is what has been laid out in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Now this may seem counterintuitive to the previous trait discipline, but as we are about to find out, the two of them can most definitely hold a symbiotic relationship with one another, even in the form of a punishment. Now, how can this be? Well, regarding training, instruction, and guidance, an example is provided in Mark chapter 6, verse 34. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. When you notice that your child is struggling and stressing out in a particular subject at school, it is completely understandable to want to alleviate that stress. But since they have a tendency to struggle in this course, you don't just want to do the homework for them. Eventually, they will have to leave the house, and depending on what they want to do for a living, they will have to seek higher education. That path will be much more difficult if you simply just wash the homework away. What you can do, however, to make the path easy for your child is provide him or her tools necessary to overcome his or her obstacles, so that way he or she can do so independently later on down the road. So in what shape or form is discipline, the form of a punishment, symbiotic with compassion? Believe it or not, we find this in the story of Israel's blatant rebellion towards their leadership after spies were sent into the land of Canaan. To sum up the story, the spies collected information about the land of Canaan. The information entailed the general disposition and composition of the people living within the land as well as the terrain. When coming back with their findings, they stated that although the land was highly prosperous, it was controlled by their adversaries that have declared war on them in the past, placing a high amount of emphasis on the negative aspects of their report. Caleb and Joshua, who were part of the group of spies, refused to spread the bad report and tried to encourage the good report. What happened next? The majority of the spies disclosed a bad report amongst the Israelites, which caused them to not only rebel against Moses, Aaron, and God, but they even wished to stone both Moses and Aaron, along with Joshua and Caleb, stating that it would have been better to return to Egypt, the nation they were enslaved in, or die in the wilderness. In response to the riot, the glory of the Lord appears among them and proposes to strike all the Israelites down with a plague for their blatant rebellion, in spite of their witness of miraculous works that the Lord utilized at his unlimited disposal to liberate them from the Egyptians and defeat multiple enemies along the path to the Promised Land, as well as the display of the golden calf incident. Moses, however, made an appeal to the Lord, requesting him to display his strength, quote, just as he declared, "The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. In accordance with your great love, forgive the sin of these people, just as you have pardoned them from the time they left Egypt until now." Although deserving of instant death, instead of striking the whole community down, the Lord instead struck down the men who had spread the bad report. He spared the lives of Joshua and Caleb. As for the rest of the community, the Lord firmly fulfills their request to die in the wilderness, with the exception of their children. Their children will enter the Promised Land, but as for those who were 20 years or older, they were forbidden from entering the land. So the nation of Israel was unable to move into the Promised Land for a total of 40 years. As a father or mother, you have to understand that your children are not perfect. It is also important to understand to not let your discipline turn into abuse. Yes, you will have to correct a child's deficiencies from time to time. There are certain times when compassion would have to be shown. A good example would be when a child makes a mistake that can actually ruin him or her for life due to hanging out with bad company. Whether it stands a chance of ruining their health or if there are legal concerns. The fact that a parent wishes to seek an alternative consequence for their child's misdeed is in and of itself a compassionate act. At the same time, the parent longs for their children to learn from this mistake so they don't do it again, so discipline would be necessary. This is discipline and compassion working together to better the life of an individual for better or worse. In the next video, we will discuss the parental role of godly providence within the household. If you have found this video interesting and want to learn more about being a godly parent, child, or individual, please stay tuned by hitting the subscribe button and the notification bell.